Good Tuesday morning, everybody, and welcome again to another Tuesday Tune-Up. And this is going to be a Tuesday Tune-Up, much like every Tuesday Tune-Up, with the exception that I'm going to ask right at the beginning for everybody watching this to share it on their Facebook page, share it with your friends. And the reason is I'm going to say at the beginning what originally I was only going to say at the end after talking about Bible and setting up the theme, which is about grief and mourning, and at the end then say, and we have an opportunity here at Epiphany Episcopal Church to worship together and name our grieving from the time of COVID, and to name it together, knowing that when we do things like that in community, when we grieve and mourn together, it's more powerful and more healing. Hence the name of this event, which is on Saturday, July 11th at 4:30, see I just screwed up, Saturday, July 10th at 4:30 p.m. here at the Epiphany Episcopal Church. July 10th, Saturday at 4:30 p.m. We are having a service called A Litany of Grief and Healing. And it is an extraordinary service that Father Rick O'Brien has put together. It's a spoken and prayed, a musicless service, which we both think fits the event. And there will be additional time even after the service for extra conversation where we can talk about the grief we've had and the healing we just experienced. But to get together and name the challenges of the last, whatever it's been, 16 and a half months now, and how we have to name our losses, our injuries, our angers, our frustrations, and move beyond them because of God's grace and with God's grace. Now, for the Tuesday Tune-Up material, the Bible talks quite a bit about grief and mourning. I think it's safe to say that for the time period of the entire Bible, the saddest thing, the most grief-producing thing that can happen to someone is to lose a loved one, and even worse in that cultural context and for thousands of years, lose an only son. This would be particularly hard if you were a mother without a husband or living father who would be relying on your son for the legal right to own property and to have money, things that women didn't have. So the weeping that we hear in the Old Testament and New is loudest, strongest, and deepest when it's the mother weeping for the death of her only son. That happens in the Old Testament a few times. It's interesting that in all the Gospels put together, we have a number of stories of Jesus bringing children back to life, again, acknowledged as, and I think today too, it's a dangerous thing to rank pain. But on the other hand, when people do dare do it, most would say the most absolutely impossible, unendurable pain that I can't imagine would be to bury my child. And there seems to be sort of a collective opinion that the younger the child, the more difficult it is. It's not because we need our son to have property rights and prevent us from starving or becoming prostitutes like 3,000 years ago, but the idea of losing a small child. And of course, it does happen. And people grieve that deeply over this. It's also consistent in the Bible that where there is greatest grief, God acts most powerfully as a God of mercy, of peace, and ultimately healing. There may be tears at the night, but joy will come in the morning. Now remember, that's metaphorical and poetic. Sometimes the morning, morning, the beginning of the day where our grief has ended and really morphed into a place of peace and calm and even greater confidence in God's love and protection, takes far longer than a night sometime. This again is just how it is, and it's okay. Don't ever let anybody beat you up by saying you've been grieving your loss of so-and-so for too long. What they mean by that is they don't grieve as long as you do. But what they shouldn't be thinking is that they grieve better than you do, or that they're somehow psychologically more healthy or have a better relationship with God. That's actually judgment, which would prove the contrary if we're going to bother to go there at all. The Bible has stories we've even discussed recently in Sunday sermons that Jesus raises Lazarus, but he only does so after he sobs over his loss. He sobs. And they even say in the story, see how much he loved him, meaning see how much Jesus loved Lazarus, that upon his death, he is sobbing in loss. And this is the same Jesus who, within a couple days, brings him completely back to life. Yet he did sob. There's a gospel story we don't talk about much because I don't think it makes the Sunday lectionary, but it's in Luke 7. And this is a young man who, like I was talking about earlier, is the only son of his mother. And I think it's in the town of Nain, it's called. All we know is where it happens. But there's a funeral procession going by, and we know that this is a young man, the only son of the mother, and she's sobbing, and Jesus says, touches the funeral procession by her and says, be awake and stand, and the guy does. And these are examples of the worst grief known at the time being healed by Jesus. And of course, at the risk of being obvious or pastor predictable, I would like to name the greatest injustice and the greatest cause of grief in the Bible is the death of Jesus himself. It's safe to say, we all know parents love all their children. It's safe to say that probably Jesus' mother had a special affection for him, given that an angel told her that she would give birth to him without benefit of a male helping in the fertilization, and has seen him perform miracles. It had to be a very, very special relationship between Mary and Jesus, between mother and firstborn son. Jesus also is, as prophets predicted thousands of years before, he is without flaw, he is without error, he is without sin. Yet, when he's being attacked, like a sheep before its shearers, Jesus is silent. He offers no defense for himself. He willingly accepts probably the most trumped up foolishness. And on a side note, notice this is what happens when church and state combine themselves. When Romans and the Jewish religious institution, Caiaphas, the Sanhedrin, all get together, bad things always happen, which is why smart countries have separation of church and state, and then they maintain them very diligently. But I digress. This absolute foolishness, sham of a trial, follows with Jesus, the most healing, the most wise, the most giving, the most caring, the most servant-oriented, the most creative, the most divine human being to ever walk on the planet, is found guilty of all sorts of trumped-up, made-up charges, and then sentenced to death. Before he dies, he's tortured and beaten. And his mother gets to watch all this and hear all this. And then hear the crowd, all a bunch of, the usual suspects. They do whatever they're told. Bah, crucify him. Bah, I'll never betray you, Jesus, says Peter. Does it 3 times. So Jesus has to even watch his most loved ones, with the exception of his mother, turn their back on him while he's being beaten and unjustly tried and then executed. Are you hearing the opportunity for grief here? You should be. And, as you know, from Friday afternoon to Sunday very early morning, God now acts as God always does at tragedy. God will act in your tragedies, in your confusion, in your loss, in your anger, even anger at God. God will eventually let you kick at the goads and bang your head on the cinder blocks and blame everybody else for your problems. It's Donald Trump's fault. It's Joe Biden's fault. Blah, blah, blah. All your foolishness, God will even let you have all that. And then God will act and grace will come pouring into our life. And that's what's going to happen. this Saturday, July 10th, at the Epiphany Episcopal Church. Grace is going to pour into the sanctuary. Don't come if you can't handle it. I'm thinking of a few people. Don't come there, burn you. Unless you're ready for deep, true, powerful healing, grace and mercy and peace from God. This is what we're going to generate. And this is why I want you to share this video with everybody you know, because somebody out there is still getting over the loss of a loved one during COVID, a loss of, if not a death of a family member or a loved one, they're still grieving the loss of how much their life has changed, that they went so long without feeling safe about going out. And if they're perfectly candid, they still don't. They're a little embarrassed that they still want to put a mask on before they go to Walmart. It's all okay. Bring exactly who you are, how you are, to the litany of grief and healing. Saturday, July 10th, 4:30 p.m. at the Epiphany Episcopal Church on the corner of Gillespie and Cactus. We will see you there, and we will be blessing ourselves by allowing God to come to us with deep and true healing at our broken places. We'll see you there.